You walk into a building. Security cameras capture your every move. There are only two ways out, and both are monitored 24/7. You're surrounded by dozens of witnesses. Then you vanish. Not just missing, vanished. As if you never existed. This isn't science fiction. This happened to Brian Shaffer on April 1st, 2006. And 18 years later, nobody knows how. Brian Shaffer was 27 years old, a second-year medical student at Ohio State University. He had everything going for him. A promising career ahead, a loving fiancée named Alexis, and a bright future that seemed unstoppable. On March 31st, 2006, he decided to celebrate the start of spring break with his best friend Clint Florence. They planned a night out in Columbus's Arena District, specifically at a bar called the Ugly Tuna Saloona. What happened next defies every logical explanation. The Ugly Tuna Saloona wasn't just any bar. It was located on the second floor of a building on High Street with only two possible exits. The main entrance, which required customers to walk down a hallway past multiple security cameras, and a service exit that led to a construction area. Both exits were under constant surveillance. At 1:15 a.m. on April 1st, security footage captured Brian and Clint entering the bar. The cameras were crystal clear. Brian was wearing a white polo shirt, jeans, and appeared to be in great spirits. He was talking animatedly with Clint as they walked up the stairs. This would be the last confirmed sighting of Brian Shaffer alive. But here's where the story takes an impossible turn. Security footage was reviewed frame by frame. Every single person who entered the Ugly Tuna Saloona that night was accounted for leaving. Every single person, except Brian Shaffer. He simply never appeared on any exit footage. Not the main entrance, not the service exit, not anywhere. The Columbus Police Department initially treated this as a standard missing person case. They figured Brian had left through an area not covered by cameras, maybe through the construction zone or somehow avoided detection. But as they dug deeper, the impossibility of the situation became clear. The building's security system was comprehensive. The main stairway had multiple camera angles. The service exit led to a fenced construction area with its own security monitoring. There were no blind spots large enough for someone to slip through undetected. The Columbus police reviewed hundreds of hours of footage from that night and the following days. Brian Shaffer entered the building at 1:15 a.m., but he never left. Detective John Hurst was assigned to lead the investigation. He had worked missing person cases for over 15 years, but nothing had prepared him for this. In all my years on the force, Detective Hurst told reporters, I had never encountered a case where someone could simply vanish from a secured location with multiple witnesses and surveillance. The investigation expanded rapidly. Brian's cell phone records were pulled. His last call was to his fiancée Alexis at 11:55 p.m. on March 31st, just 20 minutes before he entered the bar. The call lasted 2 minutes, and according to Alexis, Brian sounded happy and normal. He told her he was having a good time and would call her the next day. That call never came. Brian's financial records showed no activity after March 31st. His credit cards, bank accounts, everything remained untouched. For someone planning to disappear voluntarily, this was highly unusual. Most people who vanish intentionally access their funds or make some financial preparation. The search for Brian intensified. K-9 units were brought in to search the Ugly Tuna Saloona and the surrounding buildings. They found nothing. The construction area adjacent to the bar was thoroughly searched. Nothing. The Columbus Fire Department even searched the building's ventilation systems and utility areas. Still nothing. Clint Florence, Brian's friend who was with him that night, became a crucial witness. According to Clint, they had arrived at the Ugly Tuna Saloona around midnight. They were having drinks, talking to people, and Brian seemed completely normal. Around 1:45 a.m., Clint said he briefly lost track of Brian in the crowded bar. When he couldn't find him after 15 minutes of searching, Clint assumed Brian had left to go home, or maybe to another bar. This was unusual behavior for Brian. According to everyone who knew him, Brian was responsible and always let people know where he was going. He would never just disappear without saying goodbye, especially not to his best friend. The bar's staff was interviewed extensively. Several bartenders and waitresses remembered seeing Brian earlier in the evening, but none could recall exactly when they last saw him or if he had left with anyone. The bar had been busy that night, with over 200 patrons throughout the evening. One detail that emerged during the investigation was particularly troubling. A bartender named Sarah Wilson recalled Brian asking about alternative exits from the building around 1:30 a.m. According to Wilson, Brian seemed curious about whether there were other ways to leave besides the main stairway. She had told him about the service exit, but mentioned it led to a construction area and wasn't really meant for customer use. This conversation took place just 15 minutes before Brian was last seen on security footage. As days turned into weeks, the investigation took on a more urgent tone. Brian's absence was completely out of character. He had missed multiple medical school exams, something that would have been career-ending for someone so dedicated to his studies. His professors described him as one of the most committed students they had ever taught. His fiancée, Alexis, became increasingly distraught. She told investigators that Brian had been planning their wedding and had recently talked about their future together. There were no signs of depression, no financial troubles, no relationship problems. Everything in Brian's life suggested he had every reason to live and no reason to disappear. The Columbus Police Department expanded their investigation beyond the immediate area. They checked hospitals, morgues, and homeless shelters throughout Ohio. They contacted police departments in neighboring states. They issued statewide alerts and worked with the FBI to determine if Brian might have crossed state lines. Nothing turned up. The case began attracting national media attention. The story of a medical student who vanished from a secured location captured the public's imagination. Tips poured in from across the country, but none led to any concrete evidence. One of the most significant developments came 3 weeks after Brian's disappearance. A construction worker found Brian's car in the parking garage adjacent to the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The car had been there since the night he disappeared, but somehow it had been overlooked in the initial search. Inside the car, investigators found Brian's belongings exactly as he would have left them. His medical textbooks, his gym bag, even his wallet with cash and credit cards still inside. This discovery only deepened the mystery. If Brian had planned to disappear, why would he leave his wallet and identification behind? The car was processed for forensic evidence. No signs of struggle, no blood, no indication that anything violent had occurred. The car appeared to have been sitting undisturbed since March 31st. As the investigation continued, detectives began exploring more unusual theories. Could Brian have hidden somewhere in the building and then left later when cameras were not reviewed as carefully? The building management provided access to every room, storage area, and utility space. Extensive searches revealed nothing. Could he have somehow disguised himself and left undetected? Investigators carefully reviewed footage of everyone who left the bar that night, looking for anyone who might have been Brian in disguise. They found no evidence to support this theory. The most puzzling aspect remained the security footage. The cameras captured clear images of everyone entering and leaving. The timestamp showed continuous recording with no gaps or technical malfunctions. The footage was authentic and unedited. If you're finding this case as baffling as investigators did, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We're going to explore even more mind-bending details that will challenge everything you think you know about this disappearance. The investigation revealed that Brian had been dealing with some personal stress in the months before his disappearance. His mother had died of cancer the previous year, and he had been struggling with grief while maintaining his demanding medical school schedule. However, friends and family insisted that Brian was coping well and had been looking forward to the future. His relationship with Alexis was strong. They had been together for several years and had recently gotten engaged. Alexis told investigators that Brian had been excited about their upcoming wedding and had been making plans for their life together after he finished medical school. Detective Hurst and his team realized they were dealing with something unprecedented. Standard investigative procedures weren't yielding results. so they began exploring every possible angle, no matter how unconventional. The first major breakthrough came when investigators decided to interview every single person who had been at the Ugly Tuna Saloona that night. This was no small task. Credit card records, witness accounts, and security footage helped identify over 200 individuals who had been at the bar between midnight and closing time. Each person was contacted and interviewed. The process took months, but investigators were determined to find someone who had seen Brian leave or who could provide any clue about what happened to him. The interviews revealed fascinating details about that night, but nothing that explained Brian's disappearance. Several witnesses reported seeing Brian throughout the evening. He had been socializing, playing pool, and appeared to be enjoying himself. Multiple people confirmed he seemed completely normal and showed no signs of distress or unusual behavior. One witness, Jennifer Martinez, provided what investigators initially thought might be a crucial lead. She claimed to have seen Brian talking to a woman near the service exit around 1:35 a.m. According to Martinez, the conversation appeared friendly, and both individuals seemed to know each other. However, when investigators showed Martinez security footage from that time period, she was unable to identify the woman or confirm that the person she saw was definitely Brian. The investigation then focused on Brian's personal relationships. Could someone from his past have been involved in his disappearance? Investigators conducted extensive background checks on Brian's friends, family members, and acquaintances. They interviewed his medical school classmates, his professors, and even people he had dated years earlier. Nothing suggested that Brian had any enemies or that anyone would want to harm him. Everyone described him as kind, responsible, and well-liked. His academic record was excellent. He had no history of drug use or criminal activity, and his relationships with friends and family were strong. The polygraph examination of Clint Florence became a significant point of controversy in the case. Clint initially agreed to take a polygraph test, but then changed his mind and refused. This decision raised suspicions among some investigators and members of the public. However, Clint's attorney pointed out that polygraph tests are notoriously unreliable and that refusing to take one is not evidence of guilt. Clint maintained his story consistently throughout multiple interviews. He and Brian had gone to the bar together, they had been drinking and socializing, and he had lost track of Brian in the crowd. When he couldn't find Brian after searching for about 15 minutes, he assumed Brian had left and decided to go home himself. The investigation revealed that Clint and Brian had been best friends since childhood. There was no known conflict between them, no reason why Clint would want to harm Brian. However, the refusal to take the polygraph test continued to generate speculation. As the months passed, the Columbus Police Department brought in additional resources. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted to develop a psychological profile of what might have happened to Brian. Their analysis suggested several possibilities. First, voluntary disappearance remained a possibility, despite the lack of preparation or motive. The BAU noted that sometimes people experiencing stress or grief can make impulsive decisions that seem completely out of character. However, they acknowledged that Brian's case lacked the typical indicators of voluntary disappearance. Second, the possibility of foul play could not be ruled out. However, the lack of any evidence suggesting Brian had enemies or was involved in dangerous activities made this scenario less likely. Additionally, the secured location where he disappeared made it extremely difficult for someone to commit a crime without being detected. Third, the possibility of an accident was considered. Could Brian have somehow injured himself or become incapacitated in a location where he couldn't be found? This theory required extensive physical searches of areas where Brian might have gone after leaving the bar, assuming he had somehow left undetected. The search efforts were massive. Over the following year, volunteer search teams combed through parks, wooded areas, and waterways throughout central Ohio. The Olentangy River, which runs through Columbus, was searched multiple times using sonar equipment and underwater cameras. No trace of Brian was found. One of the most extensive searches focused on the construction area adjacent to the Ugly Tuna Saloona. The building was undergoing renovation at the time of Brian's disappearance, and investigators theorized that he might have somehow entered the construction zone and had an accident. Every area of the construction site was searched, including recently poured concrete foundations that were broken open and examined. Nothing was found. The case took an interesting turn when investigators began using new technology that wasn't available in the initial investigation. Enhanced video analysis software was used to re-examine the security footage frame by frame. Computer programs designed to detect subtle movements or anomalies were employed to see if anything had been missed in the original review. This technological approach yielded some intriguing results. Enhanced analysis of the footage revealed several individuals whose movements seemed unusual or whose identities couldn't be confirmed. However, none of these leads resulted in concrete evidence related to Brian's disappearance. In 2008, 2 years after Brian's disappearance, investigators received what appeared to be a major break in the case. A caller to the tip line claimed to have information about what happened to Brian. The caller, who refused to identify himself, said he had witnessed Brian leaving the Ugly Tuna Saloona through a service exit and getting into a vehicle with several other people. The tip was taken seriously, and investigators spent weeks trying to verify the information. However, the caller never contacted police again, and attempts to trace the call were unsuccessful. Without additional details or corroboration, the tip couldn't be verified. As the years passed, Brian's case became one of the most famous unsolved disappearances in American history. It has been featured in numerous television shows, podcasts, and documentaries. The case has attracted amateur investigators and internet sleuths who have proposed dozens of theories about what might have happened. Some of the more unusual theories have included the possibility that Brian somehow accessed utility tunnels or maintenance areas that weren't known to investigators. Others have suggested that he might have had a medical emergency or psychological break that caused him to behave erratically. However, none of these theories have been supported by concrete evidence. In 2020, advances in DNA technology prompted investigators to re-examine physical evidence from the case. While no significant biological evidence had been found at the original crime scene, investigators hoped that improved testing methods might reveal something that had been missed. Unfortunately, this renewed forensic analysis didn't produce any new leads. The impact of Brian's disappearance on his family and friends has been devastating. His father, Randy Shaffer, has spent years searching for answers and has become an advocate for other families dealing with missing person cases. Randy has worked with law enforcement agencies to improve missing person protocols and has supported legislation to enhance investigation resources. Alexis, Brian's fiancée, eventually moved away from Columbus and has largely stayed out of the public eye. Friends say she struggled for years with the uncertainty of not knowing what happened to Brian and the inability to achieve closure. The case has also had a significant impact on the Columbus community and the Arena district. The Ugly Tuna Saloona closed several years after Brian's disappearance, though this wasn't directly related to the case. Recent developments in the case have been limited but noteworthy. In 2023, the Columbus Police Department announced they were reviewing the case using artificial intelligence software designed to analyze large amounts of data and identify patterns that human investigators might have missed. This technology can process thousands of hours of surveillance footage, phone records, and witness statements to look for connections that weren't apparent during the original investigation. Additionally, advances in facial recognition technology have allowed investigators to re-examine security footage from the night Brian disappeared and from subsequent days. The hope is that improved technology might identify individuals who were missed in the original investigation or provide new leads about Brian's movements that night. The Columbus Police Department has also partnered with the FBI's Cold Case Unit to apply new investigative techniques to Brian's case. These include geographic profiling, which uses computer algorithms to analyze crime patterns and predict where a perpetrator might live or work, and behavioral analysis techniques that weren't available in 2006. One of the most promising recent developments involves cell phone tower analysis. In 2006, the technology to precisely track cell phone locations was less advanced than it is today. Modern analysis techniques can provide much more detailed information about where a phone was located and when it moved. Brian's cell phone was never found, but investigators are using new methods to analyze the tower data from that night to see if it provides any clues about his movements. If you're as invested in finding answers as Brian's family has been all these years, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to stay updated on any future developments in this case. The current status of Brian Shaffer's case remains active with the Columbus Police Department. Detective Andre Edwards, who took over the case in 2018, has stated that investigators continue to follow up on tips and leads. The case file contains thousands of pages of reports, witness statements, and evidence analysis. Perhaps most remarkably, the security footage from the Ugly Tuna Saloona that night has never been satisfactorily explained. Despite 18 years of investigation and analysis by multiple law enforcement agencies, no one has been able to determine how Brian Shaffer entered a building but never left. The case has raised important questions about security systems and their limitations. While the Ugly Tuna Saloona appeared to have comprehensive surveillance coverage, Brian's disappearance revealed that even sophisticated security systems can have gaps or blind spots that aren't immediately apparent. The investigation has also highlighted the challenges law enforcement faces when dealing with missing person cases that don't fit typical patterns. Brian's disappearance couldn't be easily categorized as a voluntary disappearance, foul play, or accidental death, making it difficult to focus investigative resources effectively. Today, Brian Shaffer would be 45 years old. His case remains one of the most perplexing, unsolved mysteries in American criminal history. The fundamental question that has haunted investigators for nearly 2 decades remains unanswered. How does someone simply vanish from a secured location with multiple witnesses and comprehensive surveillance? The Brian Shaffer case serves as a reminder that even in our modern world, with advanced technology and sophisticated investigative techniques, some mysteries remain unsolved. It challenges our understanding of what's possible and forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that sometimes people simply disappear without explanation. For Brian's family and friends, the search for answers continues. They hold on to hope that someday, new evidence or technology will provide the breakthrough that has eluded investigators for so long. Until then, the question remains: what happened to Brian Shaffer on that April morning in 2006? The case stands as one of the most compelling unsolved mysteries of our time, a puzzle that has defied explanation despite extensive investigation and analysis. Brian Shaffer walked into the Ugly Tuna Saloona on March 31, 2006, and simply vanished, leaving behind only questions and a family that continues to search for answers. As investigators continue their work and new technologies emerge, there remains hope that one day the impossible disappearance of Brian Shaffer will finally be explained. Until then, his case serves as a haunting reminder that some mysteries may be more complex than we can imagine.